The story begins under a forgotten bridge where the city noise fades into silence, and the only sounds left are the rustling of plastic wrappers, the occasional cough from the homeless, and the quiet footsteps of a boy no older than 10. His clothes are tattered, his face stained with dust, and in his small hands, he clutches a cheap plastic bag holding a piece of dry bread and a half-empty water bottle. He runs, not out of joy, but duty, across the grime-covered ground toward the one place he calls home, a cardboard box and a ragged old blanket tucked under that very bridge. There, sitting cross-legged and waiting with narrowed eyes, is his father, a hollow-faced man with a mean stare and the temper of a storm. "Where the hell were you?" The man growls the moment he sees him. Without waiting for a reply, he snatches the food from the boy's hands and begins to devour it greedily, crumbs falling from his beard, not once offering his son a single bite. The boy watches, silent, his stomach twisting with hunger, but he says nothing. He's used to this. Every single day is the same. He wakes before dawn, shines shoes for strangers with a tin can and a cloth, collects a few coins, and buys what little food he can, only to watch it vanish into his father's mouth. Then come the insults. "You think you're doing enough? You call that work?" the man snaps. "Next time, don't come back unless you've got real food." The boy lowers his eyes. There's no arguing, no crying. Crying only makes it worse. And so he sleeps hungry again, under the bridge, the city lights twinkling above like mocking stars that refuse to shine on his side of the world. Day after day, it's the same pattern. He shines more shoes, runs through more alleys, collects more coins, buys the same dry bread, and returns to the same abuse. One day, while he was polishing a businessman's shoes, the man noticed how thin and pale he looked. After paying him, the man offered, "You and your father must be hungry. Come, I'll get you both something to eat." Hope flickered in the boy's eyes for the first time in weeks. He nodded gratefully and followed him. But as soon as they reached the bridge, his father began coughing violently, grabbing his chest, faking weakness like a seasoned performer. "My son, he's okay. He eats sometimes, but I'm really not well. Please, sir."
Just a little for me.
The businessman hesitated, confused, then handed the food to the father out of pity. Again, the boy stood behind, watching his meal disappear into someone else's hands, hands that never trembled to slap or shame him, but always shook with greed when food or money was offered. The cycle continued day after day, week after week. No matter how bad it got, the boy never left. Why? Maybe it was love. Maybe it was fear. Maybe he just didn't know any different, till one afternoon, hot, sticky, and heavy with the weight of fate, a woman passed by the bridge. She wore a simple dress, carried a tote bag full of groceries, and had eyes that didn't just glance, they saw. As she walked beneath the overpass, she heard shouting, a man angry red-faced, towering over a trembling child. The boy tried to defend himself, but the father pushed him aside like trash. "You're worthless. Always have been," he roared. That was the moment she stopped. Something about that scene, the boy's silence, his hollow stomach, his bruised heart, it shattered her. "Is that your son?" she asked sharply. The man turned, squinting. "Yeah, what's it to you?" She took a step forward, her voice calm but cutting. "I'll give you food, even some change. Let me take him. I'll care for him. As long as you agree, he's mine now." The boy froze. The father barely blinked. "Sure," he shrugged, chewing on the last of his stolen lunch. "He's all yours." The boy stared at him, his world collapsing. "That's how much you hate me?" he whispered, his voice cracked. Tears streamed down his dirt-smudged cheeks. The woman bent down, opened her arms, and for the first time someone held him with warmth. No violence, no hunger, just love. He didn't look back, not even once. That day, something shifted inside him. That day, a stranger became a mother, and a father became a memory he wished he could forget. But stories like these don't just end. They echo, they evolve. And so this one was just beginning. The boy stepped out of the darkness for the first time. Not just the shadowed world beneath the bridge, but the deeper, heavier darkness that had wrapped around his soul for as long as he could remember. His small hand gripped tightly onto the fingers of the woman walking beside him. She didn't say much, just offered him her silence, her calm presence, and the occasional smile that told him he wasn't a burden anymore. As they moved through the streets, from the grimy alleys to quieter neighborhoods, the boy kept looking around, unsure if he should smile or run. His feet, used to the cold concrete, now walked over a clean floor as she led him into her modest apartment. The smell hit him first. Soap, flowers, something cooking. A smell that didn't scream survival, but safety. "This is your room now," she said, opening a door to a small but tidy space with a bed that looked impossibly soft. He stood there, confused. "I don't have to sleep on the floor," he asked quietly. "Not anymore," she replied, gently ruffling his messy hair. He nodded, blinking hard as he tried to stop the tears from coming. Not out of sadness, but disbelief. Days passed, slowly unfolding like petals in the sun. The boy didn't ask too many questions. He just observed how the woman, who he now called Mom, after she insisted, made breakfast every morning and set a plate for him before herself. How she never raised her voice, even when he dropped something or made a mistake. How she listened, really listened, when he spoke. His hands, once rough and blistered from shining shoes and sleeping on concrete, were now healing. His face, once blank and emotionless, started to smile without realizing it. The nightmares still came sometimes. Nights when he'd jolt awake, sweating, imagining his father's voice yelling at him. But she'd be there, sitting by his bedside, holding his hand. "You're safe," she'd whisper. "No one's going to hurt you now." And slowly he began to believe it. One morning, she handed him a school uniform. "You're going to start next week," she said. His heart skipped. "School him, but I don't know how to read," he muttered. "Then we'll learn together," she smiled. That first day at school, he clutched his lunchbox nervously, walking into a world that once felt like it belonged to other kids, not boys from under bridges. But now he was one of them. Slowly, he made friends.
Ow.
Learned letters, started drawing, writing, even laughing. He wrote his first story in class, a simple one about a boy and his dog. And when he read it aloud, the teacher teared up. "We have a gift," she said. He didn't know what that meant, but it felt good. For the first time, he didn't just exist. He was becoming. One day after school, he and his new mother passed a boy crying on the sidewalk. Without thinking, he sat next to him, offered his sandwich, and said, "You'll be okay. I used to cry too." His mother watched from a distance, her heart full. The boy was healing. Not just because someone saved him, but because now he was starting to save others. Yet in the deepest corners of his heart, there was a scar. A question that never quite faded. Why didn't my father ever love me? He never voiced it aloud, never wanted to ruin the peace he had found. But sometimes, before bed, he'd look out the window and wonder where the man who used to yell at him had gone. Did he regret it? Did he miss him? Or had he forgotten him altogether? The boy shook off the thoughts, buried them deep, and told himself, "I have a family now. I don't need answers, but fate." Ever so patient, wasn't done with his story. Years passed like whispers in the wind. The boy, now a young teen with clearer eyes and steadier steps, had grown into someone almost unrecognizable from the frail, dirt-covered child who once begged for scraps beneath a broken bridge. His hair was longer now, falling across his forehead in soft waves. His shoulders were broader, his back straighter. But more than that, there was a quiet strength in him, the kind that is born from surviving what should have broken you. His new mother, whom he now called Amara with a fondness no one else in his life had ever earned, had done more than just rescue him. She rebuilt him, one small act of kindness at a time. She encouraged him to keep writing. His notebooks filled with stories, some magical, some raw with pain, some too close to the truth. But he never wrote about the bridge, not yet. That chapter remained locked away. One afternoon, his school hosted a writing competition. Amara insisted he enter. "This is your gift," she said, cupping his face with pride. "Don't be afraid to let the world see it." He nodded, smiled, and stayed up late that night, penning a story that spilled from his soul, a tale about a boy who lived under a bridge, who gave everything for a father who gave nothing back. He called it The Boy Who Loved Anyway. When he read it in front of his classmates, the auditorium went silent. The words weren't just heard, they were felt. A few teachers cried. He didn't name names, didn't point fingers, but Amara knew. She held him tighter that night than ever before. His weeks turned into months. His world expanded. He began tutoring younger students for extra money, volunteered at shelters, and even spoke at events about overcoming adversity. People clapped for him now. They listened, looked at him not with pity, but admiration. Yet in all his success, he never forgot where he came from. Every time he passed a homeless person, he knelt down to speak to them. Not just toss coins and move on, but really speak. "You okay, brother?" he'd ask. Sometimes they told him things no one else had ever cared to hear. But it was one cloudy Sunday afternoon that the past, the very ghost he'd buried, came walking back into his world. He and Amara were returning from a nearby bookshop, arms full of novels and dreams, when they turned a corner near the old bridge. His steps slowed. Something about the air changed. The streets felt colder here, familiar in a way that made his heart twist. That's when he saw him. A man, frail and unwashed, sat slumped against the crumbling concrete wall. His hair was matted, face hidden behind an overgrown beard. Torn clothes, trembling hands, a rusty cup in front of him. "Spare some change?" The man croaked to a passerby who ignored him. Then the man looked up. Their eyes met, and time froze. It was him, his father, older, weaker, a shadow of the monster he used to be, but it was unmistakable. That jawline. Those eyes, once sharp with rage, now dulled by hunger and despair. The boy, now a young man, stood frozen, breath shallow. His hand, still holding Amara's, began to tremble. "Are you okay?" she whispered, following his gaze. Then she saw him too. The man didn't recognize them. "Please, just a little something." "I haven't eaten in days," the father murmured, eyes unfocused. 100 memories collided in his mind. The hunger, the beatings, the nights crying silently. He could still feel the sting of his father's slap, the way he used to call him worthless, the way he'd take food from his hands and leave him starving. Not once, but always. Yet here he was, broken, forgotten, alone. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a folded note. With trembling fingers, he knelt, placed it gently in the man's rusted cup. Their eyes met for a second longer. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be. The father blinked, confused, not realizing who the kind stranger was, and maybe that was best. The boy rose, turned to Amara, and simply said, "Let's go." As they walked away, Amara touched his shoulder gently. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, I think I finally am." Tears rolled down his cheeks, not of pain but of release, of closure. Because sometimes letting go doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're finally strong enough to move forward. The next morning came not like a regular sunrise, but like a cleansing. As if the boy had slept off a decade of weight he didn't even know he was still carrying. He stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the golden light slip across the rooftops of the city. His breath fogged the glass slightly. His thoughts drifted to the bridge. Not with pain, but with clarity. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel bound to that memory. He felt free of it. But what haunted him now wasn't what had been done to him. It was the thought of how many other children were still under bridges and alleys, in silence, still waiting for a hand that might never come, still hoping someone would say, "You matter." That day, he skipped writing, skipped the cafe, skipped even reading. Instead, he opened a blank page in his notebook and wrote just one sentence at the top. "How do I become the person I once needed?" That sentence would change everything. The seed of purpose had been planted. He no longer just wanted to write about pain. He wanted to change it. So he began with research. Hours spent in public libraries, reading about homeless outreach, child protection programs, trauma recovery. He attended local community meetings, asked questions, offered his own insights. People listened to him, not just because of what he had survived, but because of how he had turned it into strength. Slowly, he became more than just a survivor. He became a voice. At 17, he launched a blog called Under the Bridge, where he shared stories, not just his, but those of other street kids he met through shelters, outreach programs, and back alley conversations. He didn't use their names, just wrote their pain like it deserved to be remembered. The blog exploded. Readers from around the world poured in, teachers, parents, social workers, teenagers who felt seen for the first time. His inbox filled with messages. You told my story. Your words saved me. I thought I was alone. Amara watched all this unfold with the quiet pride of a mother who had witnessed a child walk through fire and now finally learned to breathe. One evening, while he was typing up a piece about a boy named Fareed, who had lost both parents and survived by collecting scrap metal, there was a knock at the door. It was Mr. Remen, a local school counselor and youth advocate who had read the blog. He sat with them over tea and said, "You have a gift, not just your writing, your heart. We're building a youth shelter, and we need someone like you on the front lines. Would you consider joining us?" The boy hesitated. "I'm not qualified. I'm just someone who made it out." Remen smiled. "That's exactly who they need." And so he began again. Not under a bridge, but inside a center with 4 walls, warm food, and hands that didn't hit, but healed. He listened to the stories of broken kids. He gave them space, time, and most of all, dignity. He became what his younger self could have never imagined: a mentor, a protector, a builder of safe places. But the ghosts hadn't vanished, not entirely. Every now and then he'd see a kid flinch at a loud voice, or hide food in their pockets in case it was taken away, and it would all come rushing back. But he didn't run from it anymore. He used it. He told them, "Me too." And in those 2 words, kids began to believe in healing.
Ice.
One night, after a small group therapy session where a young girl named Santa broke down while recounting how her stepfather had kicked her out, he sat alone on the shelter's rooftop, looking at the stars. Amara joined him. They didn't speak for a while, and she said, "You know, sometimes we survive so we can go back for the others." He nodded. His eyes misted, but he smiled. "I'm going back," he whispered, "but not as a boy anymore. This time I'm the bridge." He was no longer just the boy who once lived beneath a bridge. He was the bridge now, between silence and voice, between brokenness and healing, between being forgotten and being found. Word of his story, his shelter work, and his blog spread like wildfire. It wasn't fame he had sought, but impact, and now impact had found him. The small shelter where he worked soon became crowded. More kids came, more pain walked through those doors. Stories written in bruises, hunger, and silence now had a place to be heard. But with that growth came a new kind of pressure. More stories meant more responsibility. More pain meant deeper healing. He wasn't just helping anymore, he was leading. He began organizing night walks with volunteers, combing the city's darkest corners to find runaways, abandoned children, and the ones society no longer saw. Under bridges, in parking lots, behind closed dumpsters, they found them. Some were scared, some angry, some numb. But all of them had one thing in common. They had forgotten what hope looked like. He made it his mission to reintroduce it, gently, patiently, as someone who knew how it felt to be unwanted. He never forced anyone to trust him. He earned it. The shelter soon needed expansion. Amara donated part of her savings. Others stepped up too: doctors, teachers, local business owners. And one day, while speaking at a youth summit, he was approached by a well-dressed woman who had tears in her eyes. "I was one of your readers," she said. "My son ran away 2 years ago. Your blog helped me understand his pain. We reunited." "Thank you." He didn't know what to say. He just hugged her. But for all the lives he touched, the boy still carried his own unanswered ache. The night he last saw his father replayed in flashes. The way the man didn't recognize him. The way he begged like a stranger. And still, the boy had given without hatred. But what haunted him most wasn't the violence. It was why his father had become that way. What pain turned a man into a monster? He began to dig, searching through old hospital records, public service reports, and what he found surprised him. His father had once been a teacher, kind, hopeful, engaged, until his wife died in childbirth, and grief turned to alcohol, and alcohol turned to rage. It didn't excuse anything, but it explained something. And that's when he realized healing wasn't just for the victim. Sometimes, even abusers are born from pain they never knew how to carry. So he expanded the vision. The shelter launched a program not just for children, but for broken families, fathers in rehab, mothers in recovery, siblings torn apart by poverty and abuse. It wasn't easy. There were relapses, setbacks, days when it felt like hope wasn't enough, but he didn't stop because he had lived through the worst and still survived, still loved, still believed. One morning, while painting the wall of a new shelter facility, bright blue with the words, "You are not your past," in bold white letters, a young volunteer ran up to him holding her phone. "You're trending," she laughed. He looked confused. She showed him a video someone had posted, a short clip of him kneeling beside a boy under a bridge, feeding him. "They're calling you the Bridge Angel," she grinned. He smiled faintly. "I'm no angel," he said. "I'm just a boy who got lucky and didn't waste it." Later that night, he stood once again under that same old bridge, the one where his life began and nearly ended. This time, not as a victim, not as a beggar, but as a builder. He looked around at the new structure. Clean, safe, converted into a night clinic and shelter space. With fairy lights strung across the beams and kids sleeping peacefully in sleeping bags, he stood in the middle of it, arms crossed, a quiet tear sliding down his cheek. This, he thought, is what rising looks like. He never imagined his footsteps would echo beyond the streets he once begged on, but the echo had begun. Low at first, like a hum beneath the noise of the world. And then louder, louder still, until it wasn't just a ripple, it was a wave. What started as one shelter under a forgotten bridge became 3, then 5. He was barely 20 when news outlets started calling, asking for interviews. The boy who once had no voice was now being quoted in headlines, invited onto stages and asked questions that lawmakers were supposed to answer. "What does it feel like," one reporter asked during a national broadcast, "to go from the child who had nothing to the man giving everything?" He stared into the camera for a moment and replied simply, "It feels like breathing. Finally breathing after years of drowning in silence." Every word he spoke came from lived truth, and people listened. Donations surged. Volunteers showed up in the hundreds. Schools began inviting him to speak. Universities offered him honorary scholarships. But with all the spotlight, he remained grounded. Fame was never the mission. His cause was not for cameras. It was for the kids still sleeping on pavement, still being sold by their own blood, still waiting under rusted bridges for someone to care. He carried them all with him, every time he took the mic. But in the quiet moments away from applause and news vans, he still wrote. In his notebook, on coffee-stained paper, sometimes at dawn, sometimes late into the night, he scribbled memories he hadn't yet shared. He was working on something deeper now, a book. The Bridge Boy, a memoir of hunger, hurt, and hope. It would take months. He'd stop mid-sentence sometimes, staring at a page as old pain bubbled up, but he pressed on, because this story wasn't about pity. It was about possibility. The political world began to take notice. One senator read his blog and quoted him during a child welfare debate in Parliament. Another introduced a bill called the Bridge Act, aimed at expanding government funding for homeless youth support. And one day, his phone rang with an unexpected call. It was the president's office. An invitation. A youth summit. A national address. Amara was in tears the moment he hung up. "I knew you'd change the world," she whispered, arms wrapped around him. "You just had to survive long enough to do it." He stood on that grand stage in Washington, thousands in front of him, millions watching live. Cameras rolled, lights flashed, but he wasn't nervous. His hands didn't shake because he wasn't performing. He was remembering. He began. "I was 10 years old the first time I slept under a bridge. Remember every sound. Rats in the shadows, trucks above, my father's voice yelling, and my own stomach growling. But what I remember most was the silence. The silence of no one coming, no one seeing, no one caring. That silence nearly killed me. That is why I am here, to make sure no child ever drowns in silence again." The room rose to its feet, not just clapping, but crying. And when he walked off stage, the president himself shook his hand and said, "You've done more for this country than you know." But he didn't stop there. Fame, policy, applause, none of it slowed him. In fact, it fueled him more. He returned home that weekend to the original shelter, now a thriving hub of healing. Kids ran to him, hugged him, called him by brother, sir, even hero. But one kid, a scrawny boy, no older than 10, bruised and trembling, stared at him from the corner. Just like he once had, walked over, knelt beside him, and said softly, "You're safe now. I've been where you are. You don't owe anyone strength today. Just rest. We'll carry you until you can walk." The boy nodded, eyes wide with tears, but also hope. And that's when he realized this wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the end of the beginning, because healing wasn't a place you arrived. It was a path you walked. And now he wasn't walking alone. He had become a light for thousands. And tomorrow, he'd light the way for thousands more. The sun had barely risen over the city skyline as Aaron, now a young man with calm eyes and a composed heart, walked the crowded streets with purpose. The years he spent in love, peace, and learning with the kind woman who had adopted him had shaped him into something more than just a survivor. He had become a giver. His new mother, Mrs. Elisa, once a simple schoolteacher, had poured every bit of affection and wisdom into Aaron, nurturing his natural empathy into something powerful. Aaron had now opened a small shelter called the Bridge of Hope, named after the very place he used to sleep beneath with his abusive father. There he offered free meals, a place to sleep, and lessons for kids who were forgotten by the world. But even amid his compassion, there remained an ache in his soul, an ache shaped like his father, who had vanished into the streets years ago and never returned. One rainy afternoon, Aaron sat with a young boy who had a bruised face and trembling hands. "He's my uncle," the boy whispered. "He says if I don't bring money home, I can sleep in the sewer." Aaron's jaw clenched, the memory of old hands snatching food from him burning in his heart again. "You don't have to go back," he said softly, placing a blanket around the boy. "Here, you're safe." That night, Aaron sat outside the shelter, the rain misting on his skin, thinking how easy it was for a child's life to be ruined by one cruel adult. And yet, he had made it out. He had chosen to rise, and now he could be the difference. But fate wasn't done with him yet. The next morning, the staff at the shelter ran in with urgency. "Aaron, there's a man outside. He's weak, coughing, and asking for you. He said he used to have a son." Aaron's heartbeat stalled for a moment. He stepped out into the soft morning fog and saw him. A shriveled figure, wrapped in wet rags, sitting on the ground, head down. The man's beard was overgrown and his eyes sunken, but Aaron recognized him instantly. His father, alive. The old man looked up, confused. "Aaron," he whispered. Aaron walked slowly toward him, a storm raging silently inside him. The man who once robbed him of food, warmth, and affection now sat before him like a ghost from a chapter he'd closed long ago. The old man coughed violently, holding his stomach. "I heard. You help children," he mumbled. "Help me too. I got no one, no food. I've changed." Aaron's breath grew shallow. All those nights he went hungry, all those mornings when he was kicked, cursed, and ignored. All the times he wished his father would love him, only to be reminded again and again that he never did. And yet here he was, begging. "I did change," the father wheezed, his hand outstretched. Aaron crouched in front of him, looking deep into those eyes that once looked past him. "You haven't changed," he said, voice trembling. "You're just desperate." Tears welled up in the old man's eyes, perhaps from shame, perhaps from hunger. Aaron stood up and turned away, the moment weighing like chains on his back. But then he stopped. He turned to the staff and said, "Give him food, bath, clean clothes, and a bed." The staff looked at him, stunned. The old man's eyes widened. "You mean it?" he asked. Aaron didn't answer. He simply walked away. That night, as he sat on his bed, Mrs. Eliza came in. "You're still the same boy I found under that bridge," she whispered, hugging him. "But now you carry the strength to break the cycle." Aaron's voice cracked. "I don't hate him, Mom, but I'm not going to lose myself to save him," she smiled. "That's what healing is, not forgetting, but moving forward without becoming what hurt you." The next morning, the old man was gone. He had vanished from the shelter, leaving only the clean clothes and untouched meal behind. Aaron never saw him again. But that week, a child who had watched the entire scene whispered to another That man saved the one who hurt him, but still chose peace. And thus, the Bridge of Hope wasn't just a shelter anymore. It was a monument to something greater: the courage to forgive, the wisdom to walk away, and the power to choose love over legacy. The city had changed. New roads had been built. Skyscrapers towered over the alleys that once held darkness. But under the bridge, where the past still lingered, time stood still. Years had passed since the boy was taken in by the kind woman who saw value in his tear-filled eyes. That woman, named Eliza, had no children of her own. She gave him everything: warmth, food, education, but most of all, love. And the boy who once lived in shadows now stood in light. His name was no longer called by strangers with disgust. It was called with respect. His voice was steady, his back straight, and his heart still soft, despite the bruises it had endured. He didn't forget. We couldn't forget. Every night he remembered how his father would snatch food from his hands, curse at him for being slow, and then collapse like a helpless man just to manipulate others. The echo of hunger in his belly still haunted him. But more than the pain, he remembered the moment his father tried to trade him away for food and coins. That betrayal had shattered something in him, but not completely. A part of him still wondered, even after all this time. Where is he now? Is he still alive? Has he changed? One evening, as Eliza and the boy now, a young man named Aaron, were walking past the same bridge where his childhood had ended, Aaron stopped. His heart stuttered. Crouched beside a rusted trash bin was a man barely clinging to life. His beard was wild, his hands trembling, his eyes hollow with starvation. He was begging, "Please, food. Just a bite." Anything, the man whispered to a passing stranger. That voice, Aaron recognized it even before the man lifted his face. It was him, his father. Aaron froze. The world around him silenced. Eliza looked at Aaron and then at the man. "Is that?" she whispered. Aaron nodded. His knees felt weak, but he steadied himself. His father didn't recognize him. Why would he? Time had changed Aaron, but it had destroyed his father. The man looked up, his eyes dim and broken. "Young man, can you spare some change?" "I'm very hungry," he said again, not knowing who stood before him. Aaron's lips trembled. So many things he had wanted to say were suddenly stuck in his throat. This was the man who had beaten him, starved him, sold him, but now he looked like a dying leaf on a forgotten tree. He slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out a few bills, and bent down. His hands trembled as he placed the money in the man's lap. Their fingers brushed. The man looked up, surprised, and for a moment a flicker of confusion passed over his face. Did he recognize him? It didn't matter. Aaron stood. No anger, no revenge. Just tears rolling down his cheeks. Eliza gently held his arm. "You don't have to speak," she whispered. "You already said everything." Aaron nodded. Then, without another word, they walked away. Each step felt like a release, like an old weight falling off his back. Letting go doesn't mean you hate someone. It means you finally love yourself enough to move on. After that unforgettable encounter under the bridge, Aaron couldn't sleep for days. The image of his father, frail, broken, and completely alone, burned behind his eyelids every night. Lisa noticed his silence, how he stared out the window longer than usual, how his smile faded quickly after it formed. "Aaron," she said gently one evening, handing him a cup of tea, "you walked away. But did your heart?" He looked at her, eyes tired. "I don't know, I thought I did, but now feel like I left a piece of myself sitting under that bridge with him." Liza nodded, not to advise, but to simply be there. She understood something most people did in tea. Sometimes the pain we carry ice in tea from the person who hurt us, from the love we still wish we had from them. That night, Aaron opened an old notebook, hits, pages yellowed from time, filled with broken words, childhood scribbles, half-written dreams, and one recurring phrase he had written over and over again in shaky letters. "Why doesn't he love me?" He shut it slowly, wiping a tear from his cheek. The next morning, he made a decision. Dressed in simple clothes, no fancy shoes or labels, Aaron returned to the bridge alone. The sky was gray, and the city was loud, but this corner of the world was quiet, forgotten. Dada, his father, was still there, sitting against the same wall, his eyes dulled from hunger and defeat. Aaron sat beside him without saying a word. His father glanced at him, confused. "You again?" he croaked, and simply nodded. "I remember you now. You were the boy with the woman. You. You look like someone I used to know," he mumbled, scratching his beard. "You do," Aaron said softly. "You used to know me very well." There was a long silence, the kind that weighs more than any shout. Then Aaron reached into a small bag he had brought and pulled out a container of food, rice, lentils, bread, and a bottle of water. "Here, eat." His father took it with trembling hands, staring at it like it was gold. He ate slowly, cautiously, as if it might vanish. Aaron watched him, this man who had once ruled his life with cruelty, now barely able to chew. "Why are you doing this?" the old man finally asked, his mouth full. "Because I'm not you," Aaron replied. The old man blinked, and for a brief moment, the wall around his sunken eyes cracked. "I wasn't always like this," he said. "You don't know what I went through." Aaron looked down at his hands. "You're right, I don't. But I know what I went through, because of you." The old man dropped his gaze. Aaron continued, "You blamed the world. Maybe you had your reasons. But I was just a boy. All I wanted was your love." His father didn't reply. The silence screamed. Then Aaron stood up. "I don't hate you. But I don't owe you anything either. What I gave you today was kindness. It's because you earned it, but because I needed to give it to be free." The old man looked up, speechless. Aaron walked away again. But this time, something in him truly shifted. He wasn't walking away to escape. He was walking away because he finally understood. Some people don't change, but you can. And that's more powerful than anything they ever took from you. That week, Aaron founded a new initiative with Eliza's help. Bridge to Light, a shelter for abused, abandoned, and homeless children. Each child that came in saw not just safety, but someone who understood. Someone who had lived their pain and survived it. Aaron sat with them, listened to their nightmares, helped them rewrite their stories. And every time he saw a little boy flinch or a girl cry silently, he whispered to them the words he once needed himself. "It's not your fault. You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." Months passed. The shelter grew. So did Aaron's peace. He no longer needed his father's apology. He had become his own healing. One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Aaron stood on the rooftop of the shelter. Eliza walked up beside him. "You did it," she said. "You're changing lives. Just passing forward what you gave me," he replied. "No," she smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You took a shattered soul and turned it into a beacon. That was all you." He looked out toward the bridge in the distance. It no longer haunted him. It was just a place now, not a memory. "I used to think my life started under that bridge," Aaron whispered. "But now I know. It started the day I walked away from it." As the sun dipped behind the distant skyline, casting long golden shadows across the city, Aaron stood silently by the gates of Bridge to Light, the shelter that had become his life's mission, watching the children play, laughing, healed, whole. But inside him, an echo still lingered, a faint memory that refused to be silenced. That very evening, while accompanying Eliza through a neglected alley near the old bridge where his story began, his steps suddenly halted, and his heart dropped. There, collapsed against a wall with sunken eyes and trembling hands, sat the very man who had once been his father, now unrecognizable, broken by time and karma. "Please, ... "Just some food," the man whispered, not even lifting his head. Aaron's chest tightened, but not with anger or something deeper, quieter. He walked over, pulled out his wallet, and gently placed some money in the man's hand. The man muttered, "Thank you, son," without even realizing who stood before him. That word son, once a wound, now felt hollow, powerless. Aaron stepped back, looked into the man's lost eyes, and saw not the monster of his past, but a man swallowed by his own emptiness. He turned and walked away, Eliza's hand firm on his shoulder. That night, he sat by the orphanage window holding an old letter and scent, unread a letter he'd once written to his father, filled with all the pain and all the hope a child could carry. Without a word, he struck a match and burned it, watching the ashes scatter into the wind like his past finally letting go of him. He didn't need revenge, didn't need answers. He had peace. And in that peace, he found power, the power to rise above the darkness that once tried to consume him. From that day onward, every child who entered his shelter found not just food and shelter, but love, the kind of love Aaron never received, but always dreamed of. His story, once drenched in sorrow, became the light for others. And though he never forgot the pain, he wore it like armor, not a chain. Because in the end, forgiveness wasn't about freeing the one who hurt you, it was about setting yourself free. Years passed like pages blown by the wind, but the scars etched deep into Aaron's soul never fully faded. They merely shaped him into a man of unwavering resilience. Now a grown man with soft eyes hardened by truth and a voice that carried both comfort and command, Aaron stood on the grand stage of his life, Spurpasa, towering center for abandoned children, named the Haven of Hope, built right beside the bridge where his story began. Dressed in a simple black suit, he addressed a crowd filled with donors, journalists, and silent spectators. Yet his voice wasn't for them. It was for the ghosts watching from the corners of his heart. This place, he began, is not just brick and paint. It's the echo of every hungry cry I once silenced with lies. Every bruise I hid beneath a smile, and every night I stared into the sky hoping someone, anyone, would see me. His words pierced the stillness, each one carried by the wind like prayers once unanswered. That evening, alone in his office, he opened a worn-out notebook, his mother's old diary, sheet he once left in a box he found years ago. It spoke of dreams, of love she had for him, of regrets she couldn't undo, and in that moment, Aaron realized he had been loved. Once in the beginning, before it all fell apart, just as a tear rolled down his cheek, a knock echoed at the door. A boy, barefoot, thin, trembling, stood there with familiar eyes, the same desperation Aaron once wore like a second skin. Without asking, Aaron knelt, opened his arms, and whispered, "You're home now." That night, as the city lit up in a million tiny stars, Aaron stood beneath the bridge, the same place where he was once sold like scrap, and let the wind carry his final words to the world. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing love over pain, peace over anger, and purpose over revenge. He looked up one last time, imagining his younger self sitting beneath that broken pillar, cold and hungry, and he smiled because now he knew that boy made it out and became the man who would never let another child suffer alone again.